Good morning, everyone. We'll give it another minute. Looks like people are still joining in, and then we'll get started. Well, we'll get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Priya Bhutani. Thank you so much for joining us today. As we know, the topic of distributors can make or break a company. We thought it's imperative at some point we discussed the topic, and when we met Adriana, we thought, this is it. Adriana, can you please discuss this topic with us? Before we get started, just a little intro for those of you who may not be familiar with RegDesk. RegDesk is a regulatory software platform that uses machine learning to make global compliance easier and faster. Our platform provides regulatory teams with comprehensive and up-to-date regulatory intelligence. We have advanced tools for you to project manage and collaborate with local distributors. There's comprehensive tracking tool that also provides reportability, and an application builder that enables teams to prepare technical files for international market within hours. So our approach to regulatory is unique and one that gives clients a competitive advantage. If you'd like to learn more or try out the system for free, we'd be happy to schedule a call to discuss further. We can do so offline. With us today, we have a leading expert from Uruguay, Ms. Adriana Belza. Ms. Belza is an RA executive with over 30 years of experience. In her former role, she led the regulatory operations for the hospital medical devices sector of Johnson & Johnson. She managed a portfolio of over 4,500 product registrations and over 400,000 SKUs. During her leadership, she drove several initiatives on portfolio rationalization that led to over 1.5 million cost avoidance. So in her role, she has experienced it all and dealt with it all, from even dealing with distributors. Before we get started though, I'd like to turn our attention to our attendees. Thank you again for joining us. At the end of this meeting, we'll hold a brief Q&A. We encourage your participation, so please refer to the chat button on your screen. In the interest of time, please submit your questions throughout the course of our talk, and we'll try to address as many of your questions as we can. In case we run out of time, please email us your questions and we'll try to address them via email. Also, we'd love to get your feedback on today's webinar and ideas on future topics as well. Adriana, welcome back. It's a pleasure to have you here again today. So starting off, since our topic today is about distributors, we should perhaps clarify a few definitions. There tends to be a lot of confusion among the terms market authorization holder, distributor, and importer. Can you please provide clarity on these terms?
Sure, Priya. Thank you. First, thank you so much for allowing me to share my experience around this topic. And the first thing I would like to clarify about the right distributor, as we want to identify, is that the right distributor is that one that fits the culture of your organization. So it does not make any sense to have someone in regulatory saying that you have the right distributor that complies with everything, but then find out that you do not have, they do not do compliant sales, or that they are not financially viable. So in the context of what we're gonna discuss, we're gonna focus on the regulatory portion, but right distributor entails all of these aspects as well. The second thing that I would like also us to understand is that what we want to cover here also is not only the first moment when you identify the distributor and you want to close the relationship with them, but it goes from ideation to the identification of the right distributor, and then you go to the how you operationalize that relationship with the right distributor. So it's really important that you cover all of that, because usually over time the support from the manufacturers tend to go down, and then you blame the distributor for not delivering the sales that they were expected to deliver. But in reality, it's a matter that maybe you failed to support them with technical information or support to the customers and so forth. So I think that in the context of what we're gonna have the chat today, communication and cooperation is key to the achieving the desired results. So jumping into the definition of the market authorization holder and the distributor, and why it is so critical that we understand the difference, is because usually when you appoint a market authorization holder, you issue a power of attorney. And when you issue a power of attorney, you are allowing that company to do and represent you in the local country, right, in the country. So you are allowing them to do everything on your behalf, which is different from saying that you're going to identify a distributor, which is a company that will purchase your products and sell them further to the customers. So when you think about the market authorization holder, there are a series of responsibilities that that company needs to fulfill. And then a distributor has a different set. So why it is so critical that we understand in the beginning of anything, then any conversation that you have with your commercial partners, is explain them the difference between the market authorization holder and the distributor, because usually those that talk to the lawyers are the commercial partners, and then they say, I want you to draft a contract with a distributor, which is absolutely different in terms of the responsibilities and the liabilities from having a contract with a market authorization holder. So it's really critical that we understand that. Usually also when you mention about the importer, usually in order for a company to import the product in a country, you may need to have the registration, whereas there are some countries where you do not need that, or sometimes there might be situations where you can have a company that owns the registration and that can lend the registration to a distributor to import the product. So the situation may be different, so it's really critical that you understand the differences, because the differences between the relationship that you are going to embark with that company are going to impact the context and the verbiage of that that distribution agreement that you will have with the company. So a company may be a market authorization holder, they may import and they may distribute, whereas you may have different companies and different entities to have those roles. Okay, so it's really critical that we understand those differences.
Thank you, that's helpful. So now the rest of the conversation should make a lot more sense now that we have established the definitions. So what is actually the first few things a company should do as they think of expanding to a foreign market?
It's important that, it's like when you do a SWOT analysis, when you want to start a business, it's really critical that you start your diligence informally, so to speak. So you can Google the country where you want to do businesses. You want to learn about the regulatory requirements in that country. You may want to understand the political stability of that country, the currency, the economical scenario, and so forth. So it's really very important that you run that informal, verification of things. The second thing is usually, you may have countries where once you enter an agreement with a company, what happens is that it's very, very hard to exit that distributor relationship, right? So in the case of Paraguay and Puerto Rico, once you sign the agreement with the company, usually what happens is that it's very costly to get, and change that distributor relationship. So it's really critical that you run that, high-level investigation. Second, the second thing that you may want to do is an advanced trip, because usually what we see is that the innovative companies and small manufacturers are approached at the fairs, and when people see the innovation that they bring, usually they speak about, the excitement of the sales and everything, but oftentimes, they come back to the country and they register your trademark. So if you want to do businesses in that country, you may see that you are going to be banned unless you get the transfer of the trademark. So it's really important that you do an advanced trip rather than closing any agreement with any company that tells you how much they are going to sell about your product. So don't sign anything before you do an advanced trip or before you run a more stringent due diligence process. So you may need to come and identify a legal firm. Either if you don't come, it's really very, very important that you identify a legal firm that can give you market insights, and that can provide what is the reputation of that company. The other thing that's important to do, it's you may not want to find out late in the process that you have the right distributor, everything is perfect, they are viable and everything, but at the end of the day, the product that you want to sell, you cannot sell it because you have a regulation that does not allow you to sell it, or because there's an ISO standard that is going to be enforced shortly. So what may happen is that your product does not meet that standard. So you want to very early in the process identify those situations, and it's critical, it's critical that you do that. The other thing it's important that you identify, it's the product that you want to sell, because the distribution agreement content can be very, very different, because the obligations of a pharma company can be absolutely different from that of a cosmetic or a medical device company. So you may want to understand what it is the product that you want to sell and what is the content of that agreement. The other thing it's important that you look at, it's the regulations that are applicable to your product. For example, in Chile, you don't have any regulation, but still you have requirements for the importation. So you may want to look at other regulatory bodies, like in the example of companies that are now very, very innovative in terms of robotics. So you may want to go and reach the regulatory bodies that have to do with the registration, but you cannot forget that there are other regulatory bodies that govern that product, like the radio frequency. So if you are in Brazil, not only you go to Anvisa, but you also go to Anatel, which is the entity that regulates all that type of products. Or even sometimes you may have electromedical certification, which can be very, very costly because you have to destroy the equipment. So let's say you have a $100,000 equipment, it's going to be destroyed. So those are things that you may want to take into consideration. Also, something that's critical, because there's a lot of concern about the companies when they start the business, is that what about if I want to change distributors over time, right? And it's important that you understand that despite having a quality and distribution agreement, it's important to clarify that usually the contracts are signed in the name of the distributor, right? So it's really critical that you outline when you want to exit, that you define early in the process what are the terms of those exits, or that you identify, for example, if the country, there are countries like Uruguay where you can have two entities owning a registration, for example. So once you decide that you don't want to work with distributor A, you can start slowly registering the product with a distributor B. And then once everything is ready for B, then you can cancel distributor A. Or you may want to find, like in Brazil, Emergo-like companies where you can have that entity doing the registration of the product, and then the registration can be borrowed by distributor A or distributor B, and then you can allow that flexibility to the manufacturer, right? Now, if you want to do a more in-depth due diligence, once you have run all that preliminary assessment, now you need to go deep, just like what you would do in an acquisition process. So you may have different types of questionnaires. You may have a questionnaire for quality, another for regulatory, another for finance, another one for HCC. But when you start the regulatory piece, it's important that you ask them, do you have an establishment registration? Are you licensed to work with the product that you sell? Like, do you meet the quality and compliance standards that my company have? Something important to dig a little bit is maybe they don't, and their willingness to adapt and meet those regulatory and quality requirements can be an indication that that company is willing to embark in a long-term relationship. You may argue who's going to do the, I would say, the investment to meet those requirements and anything that needs to be invested to take that company to compliance. But it's really critical that you understand their willingness to do those investments. You may want to ask them, do they have quality and regulatory personnel? Because oftentimes the distributors are small and usually they don't have anybody. So that's an indicator that most likely you're going to have issues. You have to report complaints. You have to have, recall procedures. And if they don't have anybody in regulatory and quality, most likely you're going to have a hard time if you have to do a recall. So it's really very important to understand what is important that company gives to regulatory and quality. How do they handle recalls? Do they have traceability to the end customers? Do they have and manage complaint files? Are they willing to provide financial data? So all that transparency tells you a lot about the company that you are going to be doing businesses with, because that means that they are transparent. So once you have concluded all those questions in terms of all the different questionnaires, you may also get to a point where you identify, do I want to go direct in that market or do I want to go indirect? Usually if you go indirect, you have a higher margin because you don't have all the cost of establishing in the country. But at the same time, you may have liabilities. You may have a lack of flexibility of changing distributors. Whereas if you are if you have a local subsidiary, maybe yes, you have the expenses, but you can do a different management of the distributor and the customers and so forth. So it's really good to run that due diligence because it will help you and give you information of what are the decisions that you're going to make for the future.
Mm-hmm. That's insightful. I want to emphasize on the establishment registration piece. Can you explain the importance of that as one is doing due diligence?
Okay. The importance of doing and asking the right questions on the establishment registrations have to do with the fact that, as I said, when you talk to the distributor at the fair, they say, yes, I have, my company is authorized by the regulatory authorities in the country, but maybe they have an establishment registration for pharma. And if you're trying to sell a medical device, you cannot do that, right? Or it may happen that, yes, they do have an establishment registration for medical devices, but the product that you want to sell has special requirements, like, for example, cold chain, and that company is not allowed to store and distribute cold chain products. So it's really very important that when you do the question and you make the question about the establishment registration, that you dig as much as you can at the scope, what are the products, and identify what are the products that you want to sell, to see if they are authorized to sell and commercialize those products in the country.
Thanks. That's helpful. Moving on, what should and I know you kind of touched upon this, but what should the terms of the relationship be when we consider operations? So what should one focus on?
Okay, as I said, we want to make sure that this is a long-term relationship, and you want to make sure that you just not focus on the first step. We sign the excitement, all the excitement of the sales, and then you do not make sure that you work for the long term. So it's very frequent that in the United States, when I go and I say I want to distribute your product, that you send me all the information to do the registrations, but I never give you back a copy of the registration, or I never give you back a copy of the dossier that I submitted. So it's very important that when you issue them a power of attorney to do the registration on your behalf, they have obligations. And it's important that one of the obligations that's clearly outlined in the distribution agreement is that they need to give you a copy of the registration, they need to give you a copy of the dossier, and they need to maintain the registrations updated, because you may do changes over time and you must ensure that those changes are submitted. So it's really critical that you make sure that the company does everything. And also, when you think about the future, usually you have small manufacturers that start the relationship with a distributor, and sometimes you have a larger company that wants to acquire that technology. So when you start those conversations for the acquisition, they are going to ask you, what are the copies of the registrations that you have in X market? And you may not have anything. So I have seen several times where you have situations where you have distributors, when you ask them the copies of the registration of the dossiers, either they give you the copy of the registration and we don't know what the dossier looks like, and you have to start everything from scratch, or they have nothing. Or sometimes they do one registration, let's say in an orthopedic company, they do a registration for instruments, they do another one for implants, and this is what they use to do the importation, but this is not compliant. So it's really critical that once you start that relationship, that you monitor them and that you frequently ask them for the proof of what they have done, because otherwise it's going to be very tough for you in the event you get acquired to gather all that information later on. Also, as I said, you need to make sure that you have the HCC clauses and capture. You may want to outline all the quality requirements in a quality annex to the distribution contract. And these inclusions are really critical, because usually what happens is that once commercial wants to exit the contract, it's really critical that you have clearly outlined what are the exit clauses. For example, are you going to reimburse the distributor for what they have spent in registrations? Are they going to reimburse the inventory? Are they going to, the parties need to agree on the wording. But this is why I mentioned at the beginning, depending on what you have, if you have a relationship with a distributor or a market authorization holder, the content and the verbiage and the obligations are going to be different. And also, you may not want to unknowingly give the distributor the right to use your trademark and your intellectual property, because they're going to use your logos and everything. So it's really critical that you make sure that you monitor how they are using your information, right? The contracts usually are no longer going to be valid when you terminate a relationship with a distributor. So it's really critical that you identify how you're going to supply the customers in the event you terminate that relationship. So it's an opportunity to build your brand. I think that over the course of the relationship, you must ensure that not only you are building the brand of the distributor, but also that you take advantage to provide to the customer technical information, product information, so that you can build the brand that you want to position in the market, so that in the event you change from distributor A to distributor B, that's something that, the customers know your brand, and then it's going to be easier for distributor B to land in the market.
In your experience, what are the key qualities of a good distributor? What should one avoid?
That's a good question, because a good distributor, for me, it's a distributor that really has a good cultural fit. So if my company, it's a company that runs an ethical business, you want the same with the distributor. You want a company that cares about the product, that cares about the patients that they serve, that is financially viable. So you may want to have all this in a distributor. And once you have all the transparency and the clarity with the distributor, you can outline everything about the relationship that you're going to have with them, and outline this in the contract. So if you make all these, all these steps, if you take all these steps, and if you make observations and they are willing to correct anything that needs to be corrected in any aspect, it could be finance, HCC, or whatever, their willingness to correct those things that are not adequate, I think that gives you an indication of the good distributor. What is a bad distributor, and what you should try to avoid, is those distributors, in my perspective, that have a poor local reputation, that are not ethical, that really do not have any quality or regulatory department that helps you run, and that also they are not willing to invest, for the long term. So those are the things that I would like to avoid, to make sure that I avoid.
I know we have just a few minutes left. Perfect time to ask our conclusion question today, which is, what should be the takeaways? I know we covered a lot of different points. What would you highlight as key important things as
the takeaways? I guess that if you were to remember one only thing about what I said, it's that it's really critical that you identify if you want to embark in a relationship with a company that will be your market authorization holder, or if you want to just enter in a distribution agreement. So that would be The most important advice that I can give, because this is going to be directly tied to the context of the quality agreement, that the contract that you have with the company. The second thing is that you should never start and sign any contract with any company without seeking legal advice and without running any minor due diligence, what analysis, whatever you call it, because it's really critical that you start a business in an environment that can help you flourish the business moving forward. Also, as I mentioned, I think it's a great opportunity for you to build the brand, your brand. You don't want to build the brand of your distributor, so it's really important. And also, like quoting President Reagan, he said once about when he was in Russia, he said, trust but verify. I think that what you may want is to look at things as they arise and not signing a contract today and 2 years from now, when you want to sell your company, for example, identify that you do not have registrations, that you don't have a clue if you are doing compliant sales, how much those sales are at risk because you don't have, you know, the right regulatory requirements met. So I think it's very important. And I guess that every relationship, Priya, is different. So maybe people say, I don't have these issues. Maybe people say, yes, I do have those issues. But how well you outline the terms in the contract will determine the experience that you're going to have with a distributor. So I think that that's really key. And the more you do that due diligence, the more you're going to be able to identify future issues and address them proactively.
Thank you so much. So we have a couple questions. One of them is there a template available for private label relationships with OEMs? If not, what additional considerations do you recommend?
That's a little bit different because this is not a distributor. And as I said, it's really critical that you have the distributor, the market authorization holder, and the OEM. Because when you give, you know, all the information to the OEM, you keep the design, but you give them a lot of confidential information. So I think that on top of everything that we mentioned, I think that you need to identify what are the regulatory legal clauses that you need to cover. I don't have a standard template for that. But that's something that you need to take into consideration because you are giving that company a lot of information that you may want to protect. So I think that you may need to have a separate annex to cover all those aspects that you need.
Second question is, what is your best practice on making your distributor to share their product registration approval license and dossier?
I think it starts, you know, with the connection with the two regulatory departments, you know, understanding the obligations, because I think that when you connect the two regulatory departments, you're going to connect people that speak the same language. So I think that you need to inform your commercial peers why it is so important that you connect with the regulatory partners of the distributor so that you can explain, understand, and in that conversation, the regulatory team in your company will be able to identify insights, you know, do they have the good registrations or they don't? I think it's important to, you know, to connect together so that you can get a lot of insights that can help you identify if you have the right distributor or not.
And what if the distributor is not willing to provide the registration certificate or license? Where can they find one? Are there online? Can they find that online on agency websites, especially in South America? Or so how do they handle that?
Yes, the first thing is that if someone is not willing to give you that information, that speaks about the relationship that you have with that distributor. And that gives an indication that you may face problems in the future. So my suggestion is that you identify locally, depending on the country, how can you find mitigations to that? For example, like I said, if you have a country that allows you to do a separate registration, you may want to start that and, you know, ensure that you have another registration as a contingency. Or you may need, there are some countries where you may find that information online, but you will never find information of the content of the dossier. So you may know that X product is registered, but if there have been changes, you don't know if that license has been updated. So it's critical that you tell them why you need them. And again, it's about the relationship that you build all through the time with the distributor. If they don't want to give it to you, then that gives an indication that this is not the right distributor. They are not transparent, so to speak.
Well, Adriana, we are out of time. Thank you, everyone. And thank you so much, Adriana. It was such a pleasure having you again today. If anyone else has any questions, please let us know. And if you need to connect with Adriana as you're entering the Latin America market and need some strategic guidance, please reach out. We'll directly connect you with Adriana. Once again, thank you everyone so much for joining us.
Thank you. See you
Thanks.
soon.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.